Welcome to the Karen Kenney Show.
Hey, you guys, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I'm wicked excited to be here with you today. And for those of you who listen all the time, thank you so much. From my heart to yours, I super duper appreciate you. Yay. I just made little hearts come up on the screen. If you're new to the show, oh my God, thank you so much. So I'm not sure how you got here. Maybe somebody referred an episode to you. You might have no idea. You're like, who is this broad? I have no idea who you are. So I'm going to do a wicked fast introduction. So my name is Karen Kenney. I grew up in Lawrence, Mass, in Boston. I'm a masshole, little evolved, hashtag evolved masshole kid. I now live in New Hampshire via LA. I spent some time in California as well. So I'm a lot of things. I'm a multi-passionate person. So I'm a certified spiritual mentor. I am an integrative change worker. I'm a writer and a storyteller and a speaker. Obviously, I have a podcast. I'm a hypnotist. I'm an integrative change worker. I've been a yoga teacher for 25 some odd years. I've been an entrepreneur for like 25 years. I do Thai yoga massage. I stretch people. I do all kinds of things. So I basically use this podcast to share both stories and spiritual principles. So I'm really into down to earth practical applications of tools that help us move in the direction of our own liberation and our own wholeness. And so I kind of use, like I said, neuroscience, subconscious reprogramming, and a bunch of different tools. So the spirituality and the science, I like to bring them together. The somatic, and I'm like the somatic meaning the body, the spiritual, the emotional, the physical, all of it. The mental, right? Our mindset and the ways that we kind of navigate the world. The way that I always ask these questions, like, why do I think what I think, believe what I believe, say what I say, do what I do? This is what fascinates me about our humanity. And so I use this podcast as a way to kind of bring together some personal stories that have universal appeal, and then also share maybe some practical tips or tools or things that are helpful in us navigating this whole being human experience, which these days feels a little extra. You know what I mean? Okay, so today's episode, I want to talk about just something that I often say. So I kind of jokingly say to people in the Nest, my spiritual group mentoring program, or my best friend KT, or my sweetie, or whatever. So there are just times when, like, let's say I have something to do today, or maybe I said no to something. Maybe I got invited to something, or whatever the thing is. But an earlier version of me made a decision one way or the other. And I will often say, today, me would like to thank me from 3 weeks ago for saying no to that. Because if I had said yes, I would be completely overwhelmed right now, right? And sometimes I'll say today me has a bone to pick, or has something to say to me from 4 days ago for thinking that this was a good idea, right? So I kind of use this joke about what current me is experiencing based on what previous me decided to say, do, think, whatever, whatever story I was telling myself back then, like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, right? So sometimes today me is really happy about what me from 20 minutes ago or 20 days ago or 20 months ago, whatever, did or thought. And sometimes I'm not so impressed with the earlier choices that I made, which kind of is the heartbeat of what I want to talk about today. Because if you've never heard of IFS, or internal family systems, when I make that comment, today me wants to whatever, I'm kind of pointing back to what IFS talks about, which is often commonly known as PATS work, PARTS, right? PATS work. So, there are, and I'm going to get into that in a second with some like hashtag clarifications. But what I'm really trying to get at is a lot of times, especially in the work that I do as a spiritual mentor and helping people with change work, or call it personal development, call it whatever you want to call it. A lot of times we can be wicked hard and really harsh towards younger versions of ourselves. And we'll often like look back with like shame or regret or guilt or blame and be like, how could I do that? How could I think that? Why did I think that was a good decision? Like blah, 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 blah. And whether it's anything from like overcoming an addiction, like, you're in recovery now, or you're looking back, or something is, there's big change afoot and you look back and you just think these awful things, that inner critic, right? Which is one of those parts. That inner critic gets really loud in your head and can really kind of look back with contempt and disgust and like a lot of things. And just the other day, I was thinking about a younger version of myself, and a lot of times people will ask me how I got into the work that I currently do. And I'll often say, really, you guys, this all started in an attempt from me to save myself from me. Like I was my own first client. Like I went first to try to help myself to shift my perspective from fear to love. Although at that time, I wouldn't have, like in the very beginning, I wouldn't have like used that language. All I knew is that I was fucking suffering, and I did not want to feel that way anymore. And I wanted some, not just hope that there was possibility to feel differently, to maybe feel better. I just wanted some tools. Like that's why I'm a very practical teacher. I'm not interested in just sitting around and discussing theories and spiritual theories. I'm like a blue collar kid. Like I want to get my hands dirty. I want to be able to take something and apply it to my life, and then possibly, right, see a difference. Hopefully see a difference in the way that I'm thinking, in the way that I'm relating, in the way that I'm talking to myself and others, shifting my perspective into a realm of like all is lost, right? You remember the Lilliputians? You remember the little it was on I think it was on the Banana Splits. You might be too young if you don't know the TV show The Banana Splits, right? They would often do these little like short snippets of different shows. And there was always this show, and it was like based on like, it was Gulliver's Travels, and Gulliver was like this full-size grown man, and he got washed ashore. He was a sailor or something, and he got shipwrecked on this little island where everybody was like teeny tiny, the little Lilliputians. And there was this one little character on the Lilliputians who I always laugh when I think about, and his whole attitude, everything, like everybody else would come up with a plan. And his response was always, we'll never make it. We're doomed. And I think we all have probably a part of ourselves that's like that. We'll never make it. We're doomed. Like, meaning I'm stuck with this way of thinking. I'm stuck with this way of being. I'm stuck with this trauma. I'm stuck with this fucking dysfunctional family. I'm stuck with this whatever. And I just don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I know why we feel that way. I have often thought to myself, oh my God, am I ever going to be able to change this thing, right? Am I ever going to be able to fill in the blank, shift it, change it, transform it, heal it? Sometimes I don't really like the word fix it, but sometimes that's our energy. I need to fix this thing, we're just over it. We're just like done. Like we want something different. So where was I going with all of that? So there's often like times when we look back on our younger selves with contempt. I guess that's the word I'm looking for, and not a lot of compassion. But recently I was looking back on younger parts of myself. A friend of mine was asking me about like, how did you survive your childhood? Like knowing who you are now and how you are now, like you just randomly will tell me like these stories, and like, I'm kind of horrified for you, and I think like, yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really, like back then I was just trying to survive. I wasn't thinking so much about necessarily what I was going through. I didn't have time to have a pity party. Do you know what I mean? Now, there have certainly been times in my life where I have felt sorry for myself. I totally felt victimized. I just felt like, oh my God, why does all this stuff keep happening to me? But since then, I can look back, obviously, with a totally different lens and a new perspective. This is the gift of doing this kind of internal work and spiritual work, learning how to shift my perspective and see through a new lens, right? So nowadays, I kind of look back, and I just had this moment, and this is where you guys kind of come in. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Pat's work and IFS in a second. But there's a part of me that was like looking back. So hear what I just said. There's a part of me. So this more now, like more true self right? This I'm older, I'm hopefully wiser, I have more tools in my spiritual toolkit, I have more tools to help with my brain science and helping my brain to create better connections in neurons, like neurons, as Rick Hansen says, neurons that fire together, wire together. So I'm trying to wire together some better thoughts and habits and patterns. But so this more true self of me, and we'll talk about the self in a sec too, was looking back with such great, not just compassion for the younger parts of me, the younger versions of me, but really with deep appreciation and also like it's not awe because I reserve my awe for like the divine, right? But just like wow, like man, kid, like I look back at that younger version of me and I'm really kind of impressed. Like I think to myself like, yeah, were all my decisions great? No. However, that younger me that knew to go and follow my instinct to practice yoga, that curious part of me that loved to read books and find things out and explore and not wasn't afraid to face difficult things about myself, others, shit that had happened, stuff that had gone down, right? Like the part of me who is still alive and well and isn't afraid to kind of look at this world and look at this country and look at some difficult truths about the way, right? Don't get mad at me because if we don't start to face some things, it's never going to change. But kind of looking at America and a lot of systems that have been in place that have not been kind of compassionate to all, like all men are created equal, so it says, right? But does our behavior as a culture and a nation reflect that? No. So there's this part of me that has always been on the side of justice. And there's a part of me that was, and I wasn't so much stubborn as I was determined. There was a part of me that had a lot of fight in her, that was resilient and was tough and was gritty and was tenacious. You know what I mean? And so instead of looking back at those parts of myself and like going like, oh God, like, right? Like looking back and kind of being like cringy and like whatever, I look back and I think like, wow, those younger parts of me were doing the best that they could. And man, did they do some good work. Man, I'm like, those parts are what got me here. I wouldn't be me without them. So rather than looking back in a way that is unkind, and this is where I want to invite you as well to be able to just stop and pause and see if you can, with what you know now as an adult, right? With some of the work that you've done, whether it's been through therapy or going to AA or getting sober or recovery work or whatever kind of the spiritual mentoring, whatever kind of work that you've done, um, from a new perspective, being able to look back with deep compassion, but also appreciation. And I think it can be a really powerful practice because it helps us to forgive, right? That self-forgiveness piece, which is so important in our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being, is being able to go back and hold those younger parts close to us and to not abandon them or exile them. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Because those younger parts, first of all, if we put it in perspective and we look back and we're like, what was the environment that I was coming up in? What kind of support did I have? Did I have any kind of compassionate witness, right? Who even if they weren't there to protect me or couldn't stand up for me, right? But they were able to listen to, and once they heard that story, were able to say, I'm so sorry that this happened to you, or I believe you, right? You know what I mean? And a lot of times when we look back, we realize that those younger parts of us were highly uncared for, highly unsupervised, highly unsupported. And no wonder why they made the choices that they made, whether out of desperation, ignorance, thinking that like as a last ditch effort to save themselves or to desperately wanting to feel differently, to not be in the suffering and the misery, right? To numb themselves, whatever they thought was. And that's the thing. A lot of times when people look at other people's choices and they suck, like right? They suck their teeth or wag their finger or be like, oh my God, how could you do that? What they're not able to do is put themselves in another person's shoes and look at the resources that were available to those younger versions of people. And this is why I love doing the work that I do, because you really get to see how people's stories, belief systems, and identities are built based on where they came from and the kind of, or for the kind of support or lack of support that they maybe had. So I just want to invite you to be able to sit down and see if you can open your mind and open your heart and widen, like shift out the aperture, right, of your mind, like open, right, that lens of your mind to take a really honest and kind look at where you were, at what time, right? What time in the world, the age you were, what was your support system or lack of? You might have been missing, right? What was happening in your home? What was happening in your neighborhood? What was happening in your culture? What was happening, right, in the world, in the larger context of the world at the time? And now I'm not saying, you've often heard me say that trauma explains a lot of things. But at this day and age, if we're still running the same racket and we're still doing the same shit, right? I always say trauma explains a lot of things, but it doesn't excuse things. Because in this day and age now, we do have access to so many tools, right? But here's the thing. So what I'm trying to say is we don't get a free pass to continue acting out in ways that are no longer helpful, to us and to others. We don't just get a free pass. We have to have some accountability. And I always say, you might not be able to afford working with a coach or working with a spiritual mentor or going to therapy or whatever the thing is, the different ways, right? Where there are paid ways. But I often say, and I highly encourage everybody to have a library card because books at the library are free. Okay. You also have the internet if you have access. And if you don't have it in your own home, and I'm not saying, look, I'm not saying every single person on the planet has access. That would be a gross misrepresentation. But I'm just saying most people, there are, of course, exceptions and nuances to every rule, but most people have access, right, to the internet or to a phone of some kind. Not all, I want to be very clear, right? But there's podcasts, there's books, there's free downloads, there's all these things where we can at least start to. But the key part is, first of all, is that shame and blame and regret and all that stuff is going to make us contract, withdraw, go into fear. And a lot of times we just want to like build a wall, right, with no door in it and just say, I'm not going back there. I'm not looking back there. But what if we could look back with appreciation and look back on some certain situations and say, you know what, at the time, that wasn't the best decision, but that part of me was doing the best that it knew how to do. And that part of me held on. That part of me kept moving forward and got me where I am today. And I think it's important, like I said, in this self-forgiveness piece, in this self-forgiveness work. It's not my job to tell people when to forgive, if they should forgive. All I know is that forgiveness, as A Course in Miracles tells us, is a key to happiness. It is one of the keys. When we kind of let ourselves off the hook, when we kind of look back with compassion, and now we can become the compassionate witness to what we were going through back then and how we were doing. At the time, it may have been the best we could. Now we might have more tools and more. If you listen to this podcast, I'm sharing tools with you all the time. So if you listen to this podcast consistently, then I know you're the kind of person that actually wants to, I don't even want to say like be better, but you want to be the most fully realized version of yourself, capital S self. Not the small s self, like our personality and our ego and who we identify here, but like who you truly are. Inside each of us, there is what I call like the true self. And this is what I can say is all different kinds of traditions, spiritual traditions call it different things. You can call it the God self or your extension of the divine self or the beloved or the divine intelligence or your higher power, whatever you want to call it. But this self that has this quality of pureness and awareness in you, right? And so in Pat's work in internal family systems, which was created by Dick Schwartz, that's an important thing for you to know, Richard Schwartz. It's internal family systems, IFS, Pat's work. He talks about the 8 qualities of the true self. And these, when you are coming from this true self, which I would consider the unfractured self, not the self that is made up of all these parts, but the true whole and holy self, right? This perfect oneness of who we really are, that capital S self, right? When we can lead our lives from this self, and look, we don't all do it all the time. We do get triggered. We do get bumped out. We do stumble. We do make mistakes. We do screw it up sometimes. But if we can always remember that there is this true self that exists, and this is why when A Course in Miracles says, a cloud does not put out the sun, meaning that the sun, AKA the true self, is always there shining. But sometimes our choices, our behaviors, our thoughts, our patterns, our habits, our whatever the thing is like those dark clouds that is just sitting right in front of our radiance, right in front of our brilliance. That bullshit is blocking the brilliance, right, of the true self in the sun. But just because the clouds are there, the behavior was there, the pattern, the habit, whatever, it could be there. I don't care if it's been there for 40 years. The sun is always shining right behind it, that true self. So much of this work in spiritual mentoring is removing the blocks, the barriers, those clouds. It's removing that dark weather, right? The storm that is blocking the radiance and the trueness and the warmth and the love of that true self sun. Okay. So much of this work is removing those blocks and barriers so that you can recognize, so that you can be reintroduced, so that you can remember who you truly are, the reality of who you truly are, right? Just because you've had these patterns, these ways of being, these thought systems of fear or anxiety or worry or whatever for a wicked long time, it does not mean that the true self does not exist. So holding on to the belief that that self is in there, that you can access it, this is to me what is so wicked exciting. So when we're leading from that true self, and this is what Schwartz calls the 8 C's of self-leadership, meaning self, capital S, leading all the other parts of us. And I want you to think of your parts as like, I kind of think of them, you know, those of us who grew up watching, there was a show. So like I'm 56, right? So way back in the day, there was a TV show. And I think it was called, I don't remember what the show was called, but the main character was a girl called Sybil. And Sybil suffered from multiple personality disorder, meaning she literally fractured off and different personalities would like step forward and present themselves. When I talk about different parts, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, I'm not talking like we have multiple personality disorder, but we do have, our minds have different parts of us, different parts of our personality that were often created to play roles in times of severe trauma or just everyday trauma or stress or whatever was happening in our environment. So, and I'm going to break down kind of a little bit. Now, I want to be wicked clear. Hashtag not a therapist. Hashtag I have been hoping for a wicked long time to get trained in Pat's work. But it's not even interesting. There was a portion of time where you had to enter a lottery to get picked to be able to take the training and da 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 da. And they were shifting from not just training therapists, but allowing coaches and other people to take this training. I put myself in for the lottery several times, but there was such a huge demand. Literally, it's like picking, you know, a bingo ball out of the thing. So unfortunately, during that time window, I wasn't able to get picked, even though I slotted I threw my name in the ring and the hat in the ring. So it had nothing to do with credentials or whatever. It was just literally luck of the draw. And unfortunately, during that time window, I did not get picked during several of the lotteries. However, I have read many books. I naturally kind of came to this because if you've ever heard me talk on the show, or you've been to one of my yoga classes or one of my retreats or one of my workshops, or you've worked with me one-to-one or whatever. You've heard me talk about this, about IFS and Pat's work. And if you've been on the show and you've heard me talk about Vicky with 2Ks from Lawrence, I say she's one of my protectors, right? Vicky with 2Ks is one of my Pats. Vicky with 2Ks, though, one of her roles is protecting one of my exiles, which I'm going to explain all this in a second, but I'm just setting you up for it, right? Which is another part of me that I call the little bunny. And this is going to make more sense in a second. But what I mostly want you to remember is that there is a true self, a capital S self. Here are the 8 C's of the self. And when we are living with these 8 C's, we can lead ourselves, self-leadership, in a much better way. So they're all like, obviously they start with C's, the letter C. So it's coming from a place of curiosity, calm, clarity, connectedness, confidence, courage, creativity, and compassion. And I'll say those again for those of you who like to take notes, okay? Curiosity, calm, clarity, connectedness, confidence, courage, creativity, and compassion. And so when we can move through the world with these 8 C's, right? These are the qualities that are help us to be really present, help us to be really loving, help us to move through the world with more awareness, and to truly reflect who we really are, which is kind of the wholeness of these 8 C's. You know what I mean? Okay. So basically, I want you to think about, a lot of times in like therapeutic work or mentoring work or coaching work or whatever, people will often exclaim how it's kind of like peeling an onion, and we're peeling back the layers and we're peeling back the layers and we're getting down to the core where that core seed is, right? And I love that analogy, and I love that. And I do think it's true. It does feel that way, right? But in internal family systems, instead of thinking it like an onion, Richard Schwartz kind of talks about it like thinking about it like a clove of garlic. And if you've ever opened up a clove of garlic, you see it's one whole unit. But when you open it up, there's all these little sections, there's all these little pots within that clove of garlic. So you take that garlic head and you open it up, and there's like 8 cloves or however many cloves, right? So that's kind of it. So internal family systems recognizes that each person kind of has like an ecosystem within them. There's the core self at the center, and then there's all these multitude of pots that kind of like exist around it. To me, it's also like the spokes on a bicycle. You have that hub in the center, and then shooting off from that are all these different pots of the spokes. So at the center of who you truly are, which is that loving self, right? That self that has all those 8 C's. And then we kind of go out into the world with our pots, and that outer rim is kind of the world and how we're showing up in the world, and how these different pots of ourselves are kind of navigating and having relationships and responding and having triggers and having strengths and having places where we protect. Okay. So an IFS, what they really do when you're seeing a therapist or somebody who's working in internal family systems, what we're trying to do is kind of, instead of not wanting to look at those pots, because a lot of times we have pots that we have shame around or regret around, like especially those exiles, which I'll break down in a second, right? But part of what we want to do is to befriend those different pots of ourselves and to kind of unburden them from the roles that they got assigned in those times of stress or uncertainty or trauma or whatever, because we want to kind of come back to wholeness, to our inner peace, to the truth of who we are, that inner happiness, that inner calm, right? That inner curiosity and clarity and connectedness and confidence and courage and compassion, all that stuff that is always there. But the pots make us feel sometimes a little bit fractured. Now, if you've ever heard yourself say, there's one part of me that wants to go to the party, or there's one part of me that wants to go to yoga class, another part of me that just wants to stay home, you already know that you have pots because you say it. We say it all the time. Well, one part of me wants to take the job and I'm really excited about it. Another part of me is scared shitless. You know what I mean? There's one part of me that wants to put this in my past and forgive it and move forward. Another part of me is like, I demand justice. Like it wasn't fair, right? So we know we have these different pots within ourselves. Okay. So POTS are in IFS are classified into 4 different main categories. And if you're taking notes, like I said, you can write this down. Again, I have to keep saying I'm not a therapist, but I know enough about IFS because I use it for myself and I introduce it to my clients because I think it's a really powerful framework to work within and to discover. And it explains so much, you guys. It explains so much. Okay, so there's 4 main categories. There's the capital S self, which I already talked about. And this is the core of who you are, right? Sometimes this part of you gets described as like the captain, the true captain of your ship. Okay. All right. Then you have what are called managers. Now, the managers are a protector. So they're kind of like these protectors. There's 2 kinds of protectors. So you have the capital S self. That's the true self with all of those great qualities, right? That's who you really are. And then you have protectors, and there's 2 kinds of protectors. There's managers and then there's firefighters. Okay. Now, the managers are the proactive protectors. These are the ones that kind of like avoid stuff, they prevent stuff, or they try to control things. Type A, control freaks, double amen hands, raise your hands. You know who you are, right? Those of you who try to control your environment, control outcomes, want certainty, try to control other people, worry about things, right? You're very proactive. You like to get shit done. You're type A. You're like, let's go, like da da. That proactive energy, okay? Those are the managers. They're one of your protectors. Then you also have the firefighters. Now, the managers are proactive, but the firefighters are reactive. And these are the ones that respond to perceived threats. And these are the ones, it could be anything from like, perceived threat of, and I'm just making this up. I'm not saying you should think this way about yourself. I'm just saying like, oh no, like you look in the mirror and you're like, and you start grabbing your fat or whatever, right? And you're like, oh God, I'm getting fat. I better get my ass to the gym. I got to start working out. I got to start da 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 da, right? They're reactive to the triggers and the things that are coming up in your life. So the managers are proactive. They try to get ahead of stuff and they try to like plan and have everything in order and control everything because otherwise they don't feel safe. Firefighters are reactive and they're kind of responding to like triggers and like, oh shit, and I better do this. And they tend to like overdo and they kind of respond sometimes in a maybe aggressive or obsessive way, if that makes sense what I'm saying. But these protectors, these 2 groups of protectors, we have to ask ourselves, what are they trying to protect? And what they're really trying to protect is the other set of parts that we call the exiles. And the exiles are the parts of ourselves that we try to deny, we try to push away, because often it's just too painful to go there. Have you ever yourself said, I don't want to go there? Or you'll be like, oh, I tried to talk to my mother about this thing that happened, but she doesn't want to go there. So her protectors are in place and they're saying, nope, we are not going back and looking at those exiles. We are not going back and looking at those parts of ourselves that we have abandoned, that we have said, nope. Like this is a very New England thing, right? I write about this in my book. I call it suck it up and stuff it down. So we kind of tell those really younger, they tend to be the much younger parts of ourselves that really experience things, traumas, dramas, awful things, all the awful things that can happen when you're young and you're innocent and you're vulnerable and you're at the mercy of bigger people who can do things to you, right? And that's everything from, of course, sexual assault to divorce to poverty to not having enough food to being parentalized too soon, like all the things that we know can happen to little kids growing up in a violent system, a sexist system, a racist system, a misogynistic system, a system that doesn't love you, tells you you're not good enough, that ignores you, that abuses you, like all the things that can happen when you are young and vulnerable as a child. And so we have these exiles and we just kind of go like, nope, we're not going to deal with that. And you can think of the exiles as everything from the angry teenager all the way down to the terrified toddler or the hungry baby or whatever, these different parts of ourselves that did not get their needs met, that were not seen, that were not cared for, that were told to suck it up, that were told to stop whining, those parts of ourselves that didn't feel like we had a right to feel what we feel and we didn't have a voice. And, people could do things to us and get away with us. We weren't believed. We were abandoned, abused, all the things, right? So we have these parts of ourselves that we deny and push away because it's too painful to look at them. So when I was saying earlier, Vicky with 2Ks from Lawrence, she basically, one of her main jobs is kind of like protecting the little bunny. But not only does she like to protect the little bunny, she likes to protect everybody else's parts, vulnerable parts too. And that's the part of me, I think very much part of, my veganism and being a vegan and why I care so much about animals. And first of all, I just love them. How could you not? I don't get it. I'm not being mean. Unless, I understand sometimes people have stories as to why they're afraid of dogs or whatever. But for the most part, I just don't get people who don't like animals. It just blows my mind in some way. But that's a story for another day. Now, I'm not trying to be judgy. I'm just saying, I have such a deep love for them. I'm I don't get it. But there's a part of me that my veganism is really driven by a desire for justice. And that's kind of like Vicky with 2Ks. I don't like bullies. I don't fucking like bullies. I don't like people. And I understand bullies are made, right? Not born. A lot of times bullies are made because they come in environments. Not that I don't have compassion and I can't psychoanalyze it and look at it of why they're that way. But I still don't like the behavior and I don't tolerate it, right? I can tell you a story. I'll tell a story on another podcast episode of something that recently happened where I was yeah, no, not on my watch, right? So I like helping the voiceless to have a voice. I like standing up for me, what is right. I like to care for other people's exiles. And so much of the work that I do, what we're doing is not only reclaiming the true self, right? But we're kind of, sometimes in order to claim the true self, we have to kind of go back a little bit. This is part of the whole your story to your glory process, right? We have to kind of go back a little bit and get in touch with those exiles a little bit. Not saying we have to go back and stay there and psychoanalyze everything, but part of knowing where you're going is knowing where you're coming from. You know what I'm saying? So it's okay, so why do these behaviors, these protectors, right? Why do these firefighters and these managers exist? It's because they're trying to protect. This is the big question. If you recognize that you are your true, whole, holy self, then there's nothing to protect. I always say, try to move through the world with nothing to attack, defend, or prove. But until we start doing this work, right? Until we start doing this work, and whether you do it with me in one-to-one mentoring or join the Nest or some community or group like that, or you go to therapy or whatever, or get a coach of your own, right? Until we start to do this work, a lot of times it's we are just reacting to life instead of coming at it. We're reacting out of fear and ego and patterns and habits, and we don't question why we believe what we believe and think what we think and say what we say and do what we do. But I'm really curious about well, how did we get here? Number one. But then the most important question is now what? And I'm going to do a whole podcast on now what. Okay. So this is, I just think, really helpful. I'm just introducing the idea of this stuff because some of you may have never heard of it before. Some of you in the nest or people who have worked with me, I know you've heard of this before. But if you're more curious about it, right, there's some great books out there. There's, Introduction to Internal Family Systems by Dick Schwartz, No Bad Parts by Dick Schwartz. We All Have Parts. That's another great book. But you can look these up and get curious, but you're going to discover, and all of a sudden you'll be oh my God, this makes so much sense, right? So we all have these exiles that we kind of push to the past and we don't want to look at. But man, do those parts of ourselves need a compassionate witness. And sometimes when I do hypnosis work or practical neuroscience work with my clients, part of what we're doing is we're allowing your wisest self now, the advocate for yourself, the true self now, to be able to go back and help those to update, to give those younger selves an update like, hey, we're not back there. Because what happens a lot of times, you guys, in case you didn't know this, a lot of times when there's trauma or something that happens, or even this happens sometimes in addictions, parts of us get frozen in time at the time of the offense, at the time of the abuse, at the time of the murder or the death or the divorce or whatever's going on, at the time of the start of the substance use, right? Parts of our personality. And remember, these are not like, we're not like have multiple personality disorder. These are parts that were created to often survive situations that we were going through. And some of those situations were temporary. Some of those situations were ongoing for long periods of time. And these parts were created to help us to survive. What happens though is those survival mechanisms that we created when we were younger, they start to get in the way as adults. They get in the way of the things that we actually want the most, right? They get in the way of us being vulnerable. They get in the way of us having intimate connections. And intimacy doesn't just mean sex. It means really being able to be open, to be vulnerable, to share what you feel, to be seen, to ask for what you want, right? To be able to know that it's okay that you have needs and to share those with people outside of you, right? So much of this work that I do is about this return to self, but it's also looking back and understanding how we got where we are now and where do we want to go. And really where we want to go is to reclaim the liberation of self from these old patterns and habits and feeling held hostage by these things that happened, right? So there's just so much, like I could go, I geek out on this. I love this. It has helped me to understand myself and other people in my life. I often say like mentors are fantastic. Mentors are so important, but your tormentors take you a long way too. And what I mean by that is if we can go back and understand who we are now as the result of what we went through, maybe sometimes at the hands of those tormentors, right? It's a very powerful thing to reclaim our power back and to not continue to feel victimized by our life, by others, by what happened or what earlier versions of us chose to do out of mere survival. So these are not like fractured off parts and we have multiple. This is just that there were assignments that were given to different parts of our personality to keep us alive, to help us to survive whatever we were going through. And now we want to unburden them. We want to befriend these parts of ourselves. We want to unburden them from these roles so that they can relax. So our nervous system can find safety and we can start to move through the world with curiosity and calm and clarity and connectedness and confidence and courage and creativity and compassion. We want to be self-led. We want to have self-leadership. And this is one of the things that I love to help people with. So if any of this resonates with you, please, right? And again, I'm very aware of people's budgets. I think now more than ever, though, I really believe this. We need to be investing in ourselves and getting the help that we need because trust me, take a look around the world. All the world is, right, is a conglomeration. It's made up of individuals. So when individuals start to do their internal work, this is how the external world changes. The internal work creates a different external world. And so now more than ever, I think it's amazing. And look, working with me one-to-one, it is an investment. I don't lie. It's called the Quest, right? You work with me one-to-one in the Quest. It's a 4-month program. And you can find everything on my website, KarenKenney.com, but you can literally go to KarenKenney.com/quest. You can think about joining the Nest, my spiritual mentoring group program, which is like collective learning. It's like coaching and mentoring, but in a group setting. And that's KarenKenney.com/nest, right? There's lots of different ways. If you live locally, come to a yoga class on Tuesday nights at 6, right? You know what I'm saying? So there's different ways. to work with me. But I hope this has been helpful in some way and just started to, if you're aware of this whole time, you might be shaking your head. Yes, you know about this. You read some books, you did some work with your therapist, whatever. Amazing. Great. Keep going. If this is new to you, I hope you also found it helpful in some way, that it made you go like, oh, or you discovered something, or you're like, double amen hands. That makes so much sense. Right. So I think what I was trying to say, though, to come back to it, today me wants to thank 2-year-old me, 4-year-old me, 6-year-old me, 12-year-old me, 8-year-old me, 21-year-old me. I look back at, because I know a lot of the paths that I carry within me were created at those different stages and places based on what was going on in my world. And now part of my work with myself is going back and informing some of those paths that maybe got stuck at 2 and 4 and 8 and 13 and 12 and whatever, and say, hey, I'm here. And there's certain questions that we can ask those paths. And there's ways of kind of like I call updating the system. You know, when whether it's Zoom or any app that you're on, and they send an update and the whole system gets updated. It's really helpful to go back to those exiled parts of ourselves because those parts are frozen in time. They don't know that I'm now 56 and happily married and I have a home and I do work that I love and I'm writing a book. And you know what I mean? They don't know that we're safe. So this work sometimes is me going back. And if you ever listen to my podcast where I talk about, I ask the question, how old are you? How old are you? So when you feel, sorry, something's going on. Sometimes do you ever see me doing something weird with my jaw when I'm talking or rubbing my ear like this? It's sometimes my ear gets blocked and like my voice echoes in my own head and I can't fucking stand it. It makes me crazy. Okay. So if you ever listen to my podcast episode, how old are you? The question I want you to ask when you get quote unquote triggered or you find yourself like reacting like, wow, like that was out of character or reacting. A lot of times I'll say jokingly, oh, I got hijacked by one of my parts or one of my parts is going into protective mode. So when I ask myself, how old am I right now? A lot of times I realize is that some younger version of myself is crying out for help, is crying out for love, or has triggered one of my protectors, one of my managers, or one of my firefighters. And so to be aware that that is often a response and to meet it with compassion instead of contempt, to meet it with curiosity instead of judgment, to meet it with calm instead of chaos, and to be able to say, oh, something's coming up for me right now. And then take a moment to get quiet and ask that part of myself, first of all, how old am I right now? What part of me is feeling scared? And then asking the question from the wise advocate, from the true self, right? Like yourself, your divine intelligence part of yourself, your God self, your higher power, whatever you want to call it, right? Just knowing that your capital S self is never put out. It is always there. It exists. And this whole idea is we can help these parts to not feel so separated. It's about coming back into full integration into our wholeness and our holiness. And so if we can spend a little time asking those younger parts of ourselves, you know, is there something you want me to know? What is it that you need? And letting them know I'm here for you and starting that inner healing process, that shifting of perspective, that shifting of consciousness from fear to love, from body identification to spirit identification. So there's so much. Like I said, I could keep going on and on and on, but I think I'm going to wrap things up here. But I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you learned something or it triggered some of your own, it brought up or inspired some of your own curiosity to dig into this a little bit more or to maybe come work with me. So remember, KarenKenney.com/the quest or /the nest or /sign up if you just want to get on my email list and get this podcast delivered right into your inbox every Thursday morning. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, night, week, whenever you're listening to this. And if you found this helpful in some way, I would love to hear from you. You can always shoot me an email, send me a DM on social media, like whatever, come find me. And then just let me know what part really stood out for you or what you discovered about yourself. I love that. And also, if you want to support the show in any way, you can make a love donation at my tip jar. Just KarenKenney.com/tip jar. All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. As you in all your parts, as your true self in your parts, go out into the world, wherever you go. May you leave yourself in all your parts and the animals and the place and the people and the environment better than how you first found it. Wherever you go, may you in all your parts, your true self, be a blessing. Bye.